semi-final round of the 23rd ICU tournament. Welcoming the two teams on government, we have such debate loud with an exclamation point on government and opposition, Japan and Korea. So welcome both teams. Judging this round is a panel of 7 judges, with myself, Joshua Park from SDS chairing, and from my left and to your left as well. With me, first of all, Keisuke Takashima from AHyun, Sei Takizawa from ICU, and our DCA from ICU, Takahiko, Kevin from Chula, our second DCA, and TJ, also from sort of Chula and Thailand, also our DCA. And to the right of him, Sumin Kim from Korea University. And that's it. Alright, so the two teams have decided to debate on the motion. This house opposes the notion of a white Jesus. Now before we begin, I'd like to invite or ask all of the members of the audience to please turn off your cell phones or put it on silent mode so that it does not disturb the viewers. And please, while you may applaud or respond, please do not make it so rowdy as to distract either the viewers or the judges. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister from the government side, Yuki, to the podium.
The notion of a white Jesus that we are going to be talking about in this debate is the notion that Jesus is white. The factual statement that Jesus is white. And we think that from our side of the house, racial identity is not necessarily important for religious activities, for religious teachings in the first place. That's the reason why in our society we have a fat Chinese Buddha alongside a thin Indian Buddha. It doesn't detract from the power of Buddha or a teaching of Buddha. It's also the reason why Muslims are not allowed to depict Muhammad, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the power of his teachings or the power of what Muslim means in the first place are detracted at any way. From our side of the house, the scenario we support is a scenario where we have a plethora of Jesuses. We're happy to even have 3 or 4 of different Jesuses in one church. You know, one Japanese Jesus, one Korean Jesus, one Asian Jesus, one South American Jesus, that kind of thing. Where we want a plethora of different Jesuses, and we want it to be as least stereotypical as possible. And we don't necessarily think from our side of the house that appearance in any way doesn't affect any of the teachings or the power of that religion or of that religious figure. We need to recognize first and foremost that the Catholic Church are already doing this to a certain extent. The images of Jesus that they have released in Asia are not the same as the ones that they have released in South America, and it's also not the same as the ones they have released in Europe. Christian institutions have already come to an idea to reject the notion to a certain extent, and we think that from our side of the house, this is something that needs to be pushed further and want to implement it into the fullest extent. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. Firstly, about why this is going to help the increase in participation in the Christian faith, and it opens up the dialogue. Secondly, how it's also going to increase the dialogue in the sense that people are more willing to engage in these in Christianity, especially in the third world. And then I'm also going to talk about how the existence of the notion of a white Jesus plays into racist narratives in the developed nations and why that's bad and why we can go about fixing it, talking about symbolism and how symbolism is important for religion. And then I'm going to talk about how this creates a sense of inferiority among Christians in developing nations as well, and why we can go about fixing that as well. So the first point about increasing the participation in the Christian faith, how we can open up dialogue. I think that it's far more easier for people who are yet to believe or buy into the idea of Christianity to relate to the idea in itself, the notion, the religion of Christianity, if that figure of Jesus looks more similar to you. If that person looks more from from where you're from, has the same racial identity as you, I think that people are more willing and more likely to buy into that idea. The fact that the notion of white Jesus exists now, saying Jesus is from the white background, he is of the race of the white. We think that is something that was just alienating, and we think that if the leader of the faith looks completely different from who you are or where you're from, then we think this is going to be really hard for missionary activities who are trying to gain Catholic believers to join the church in itself. We think in this instance it's going to be beneficial for the Catholic church in general, firstly. Secondly, we think that it's more likely to get people to engage in dialogue in these instances. We need to recognize that if we have a Jesus who is from the same racial background as you, who share the same identity as you, who share the same commonalities as you, it creates a situation where that Jesus is less foreign to you. And we think that this creates a situation where people are more willing to engage into religious dialogues between faith. We think that this is something which doesn't necessarily happen in the third world nations. We think that this is something, by creating this, we can go about increasing the religious dialogue and therefore lessening the religious tension that exists between the religions inside the nation. This is also the reason why Buddhism has many different Buddhas and has decided to incorporate this policy, and that's also partly the reason why Buddhism in itself has less conflict compared to the other religious identities that exist in our society. So secondly, how this plays into the race narratives in the developed nations. We're talking mainly about the USA because that's the biggest example that exists. We think that the existence of the notion of white Jesus is something which is used as a justification of many races that white people are far superior than the black people. That narrative goes like this. Well, Jesus was white. Well, God's Son himself was white. God created his own sibling, his own son to be white, therefore white must be superior. Why would God choose white if that's not the case, right? This is used as a justification to show that the white race is superior than the black race, and this is the reason why this is the way it plays into the racist narratives in the developed nations. Take an extreme example of the Ku Klux Klan. We believe that many racists are functions as Christians. We're not saying Christians are racist, but just the other way around. We need to, when you look at the Ku Klux Klan, they use crosses as their symbols. Even in the case of Martin Luther King, a crucifix was burnt on his lawn weeks before his assassination in itself. We need to recognize that racist narratives are dependent to a certain extent on the existence of this notion that of Jesus is white, and that's something we think we can change from outside our house. I think this is something which is far harder to do so if you have an Arabian-looking Jesus, an Asian-looking Jesus, a black-looking Jesus, and so on and so forth. It takes away the possibility for one single race to take Jesus as their own and use it as a tool to further the racist narratives. We need to understand, more importantly, the religion of Christianity is something which is believed by people of many different backgrounds, of diverse backgrounds, and therefore we think it's wrong to have only one race dominate that notion. Yes?
Is the existence of extremists inherent nature of the constant of like Jesus?
We don't believe so, but what we're saying is that the existence of white Jesus strengthens that presence and strengthens that narrative. That's why we want to change it. We need to understand also how symbolism is important for religion. We're talking about hand symbols in Buddhism or calligraphy in Islam, that kind of thing. We think that these symbolism has a powerful meaning in itself to influence the people when you're considering religion, and by altering this symbol, it changes the people's behavior and outlook on the ground for these people. That's why we want to change the symbol of a white Jesus, and that's why we think this is going to be very effective in achieving our goals. Finally, we need to talk about how this is creating a sense of inferiority among Christians in the developing nations to some extent. We need to understand that these people in the developing nations who believe in Christianity are seeing the God of their worship, of their religion, from a race that have dominated their economy, from a race that have conquered their country, from a race that have exploited their resources, and from a race that have completely destroyed their nation to an extent. We need to also understand that this makes it easier for them to think that the white people are superior, or moreover, even if they do not think so, it creates a counter-narrative that creates more conflict between the two races. We need to understand that this existence of the notion of a white Jesus makes it more likely for them to submit into that narrative, buy into that narrative, and we believe that by having the God of your own race as well, it changes that calculus of those people, and it makes the world a much safer and much